The backstitch. It's the most commonly used stitch to outline or stitch a line in a design. So it's what we use around the outside edges or over all of these lines on our colour K versions. And we will also use it in some of the embroidery designs as well, as shown on your stitch guides. It's quite a simple stitch. We come up from behind with our knotted thread, and you take the needle back down one step forward. You come another step forward, and then it's very important that you go back into exactly the same hole as the end of the previous stitch. There are two ways of stitching when embroidering. There's what I'm doing now, which is called stab stitching, where I'm doing each part of the stitch in a separate motion. So I'm going through to the back, and I'm bringing the needle to the front, bringing my hand to pull it through, and back through that exact same hole to the back. The other way of stitching is what I call sewing or scoop stitching, where you do both parts of the stitch in one motion. So I'm putting my needle in the same hole as the stitch before, and then I'm using my finger underneath the hoop here to push up the bottom of the needle, and I can see where the point of it is on the back of the fabric. I'm going to slide that back until it's where I want it, and then I push it through. So as you can see, that makes completing the stitch in one step instead of two, so it can be quite a bit quicker. And once you get the knack of pushing that needle up underneath so you can see where you poke it through, it can be quite quick and very accurate. When we have a line to follow on our project, to get a nice straight line, we want to make sure we're placing the needle exactly in the middle of that line every time. If we just go a little bit to the left of the line and then a little bit to the right of the line, even a tiny bit, you'll end up with a zigzag line instead of a nice smooth straight line. So it's important to have the correct needle with that sharp point so you can pierce it exactly in the middle of the line with every stitch, and you know exactly where it's going to go, and it will give you a perfectly straight line. Another tip, another thing that can go wrong, if you don't go back into the exact same hole, so if you're just a thread apart, what happens is you get little dots in between your stitches, and then it's more of a running stitch. A running stitch, I will show you at the same time, is simply in, out, and you can run several at a time, and you get a dash and a space and a dash and a space. Now you can have a big dash and a little space, so it's mostly stitching, or you can have even up and down, so you've got the same amount of fabric on the needle as what's under it. And that's the variations on a running stitch. So long stitch, small dash, or even. So the same there as there. But for our back stitch, we don't want the gaps in between, so we need to make sure we go into the exact same hole as the stitch before. All of our colour K samples have been stitched with just 2 strands of embroidery thread and a back stitch. Sometimes some of the flowers are stitched using other stitches, and that will be noted on the stitch guide. These are all just a guide. You could use multicolour threads, and you can use any stitch you like to add embellishments to your colour K, so to your colouring in. It's totally up to you. The pattern is just a guide. But if I want to stitch this vein up through the centre of my leaf, the transfer line is there so I can see it, then I'm just putting my needle in and out right in the center of that transfer line so that I get a nice smooth line down the middle of my leaf, and then I would continue on until I had stitched over every single transfer line around the colouring in, and then your work would be completed. So that is the back stitch. Things to remember: sharp pointed needle. The crewel needle that we include in your kit is perfect. Sharp point, long eye for easy threading. Strip the threads before you start unless you're using 6 threads. The needle has to pierce the line exactly in the centre of the line, and it has to go back into the exact hole as the stitch before. Keep the stitch length even, so every stitch is about the same length. If you're going around a curve, you'll need your stitches to be small enough to get a small curve and not a spiky curve. So it depends how tiny your curves are as to how small your stitches need to be. About 2 millimeters, 2 to 3 millimeters, or 1/8 of an inch is fine for your stitches. There's no right or wrong, just keep them all a consistent size. Happy stitching!